Hello everyone, my name is Bartosz Góralewicz. I'm a CEO of Onely and welcome to Semrush Weekly Wisdom. Today we're going to talk about JavaScript SEO and we're going to get a little bit geeky with this topic. So let's talk about the history of JavaScript SEO for a second. JavaScript SEO is a fairly new concept. It actually started getting popular around 2016 when we published our first experiment that showed that Google has a little bit of problems indexing JavaScript generated content properly. This experiment got very, very popular quickly because it basically showed that Google is not very good, it's not perfect, it's struggling with rendering JavaScript. So Google actually could render a little bit of JavaScript. It was basically, and still is a little bit slow, but at that time most of other search engines didn't even have the technology or resources to index even a little bit of JavaScript content. Still, this showed a little bit of a problem, and that's what I want to talk about today. So let's start with what's the main difference between HTML content and JavaScript content, because this is something that we really need to differentiate somehow. We are all used to HTML and CSS built websites for years now. With HTML website, you just look into the source code and you can see most of the content that's going to be visible on the website when you open it. With JavaScript, in a lot of cases, it's not like that at all. When you look into the code of the JavaScript powered website, in many cases you can just see a few lines of JavaScript script and there is no content that's visible on the page at all. So we can compare that very in a visual way, that HTML is like a ready-to-go cake and that's basically ready to consume by Googlebot and WRS, so web rendering service, and JavaScript is just a lot of ingredients that still have to be processed by either your browser or on your mobile or your desktop, or by Googlebot and the rendering service to create the final content, final product, or in this comparison, final cake. So this is very resource intensive, especially on the CPU of either your device or Google servers. And this is actually what makes JavaScript so difficult to work with and a little bit complex at the same time. Let me tell you one thing before we move further. And a lot of SEOs will be repeating or claiming that JavaScript is evil. I can understand where it comes from, but working with JavaScript for quite a bit and working with a lot of enterprise companies, e-commerce platforms that actually are powered by JavaScript, we never had a problem with that once we understood the problem and we worked with developers to fix that problem. So I guess JavaScript is not really evil, it's just a little bit more complex than HTML and CSS that we're all used to. So let's go through a quick checklist of how to make sure that your website is properly crawled and indexed in Google and other search engines. So let's go through a few steps so you can check if you have a JavaScript problem or maybe this is something that's not a problem for your website. So first of all, the first amazingly simple step is basically go to your Chrome browser, just download quick JavaScript switcher plugin, switch off JavaScript and see if any of the content within your page is gonna change. If you switch off JavaScript and you see that, for example, part of your article or your product description or your images disappear, this means that Google may struggle to index these parts of your website. So that's step number one. Step number 2, go to Google URL inspection tool and see if your website renders properly for Google. That's a very simple step, and you can see first of all if the website renders properly, and you can look into the code that was processed by Google and you can see, okay, is that what we're looking for? Is that the content we're actually sending to the browsers? Is it the same content I'm seeing in my Chrome browser or whatever you're using? step number 3 is, and this is actually a little bit tricky, but this is something that the simplest way to check if your website relies on 2 waves of indexing. So with step number 3, go to google.com and see if Google indexed the content from a website or from a page that you published within the last few minutes or few hours. So if you published a new article 1 hour ago, and you can see, okay, the URL is indexed, make sure that every single piece of that article or that page are indexed in Google. And this is where I actually have to introduce a new concept, which is partial indexing. So it may happen that with JavaScript content, some of your content within the URL is indexed, some of the content isn't. And this is actually where it gets a little bit tricky, because the content that's not going to be indexed is content that relies on JavaScript. So make sure to check different parts of the page and see if they're properly indexed in Google. So that's the step number 3. Now step number 4 is, if you're feeling geeky, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, go to your Search Console and check a few last crawled pages. Compare the code that you can see in Google Search Console with what you're seeing in your browser and see, okay, are there any anomalies? So those are the 4 steps that you have to take. But now, what happens if you found some problems or some potential issues during those 4 steps? For example, you're seeing that Google is taking a little bit too long to index your content, or some of your content is never indexed in Google or other search engines. If that happens, you need to consider some form of rendering your JavaScript for search engines, especially depending on your market, in most cases for Google and Googlebot. This is something I'm gonna cover in the next episode of Weekly Wisdom with Bartosz, so make sure to subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much.